the Soil, Save the Earth, based on the discussion, the film, Kiss the Ground. We're going to just give people a couple minutes here to join, and then we'll get started very shortly. All right, I think we'll get started. So once again, good afternoon, and thanks so much for joining us today. My name is Helen Marsh, and I'm one of the many volunteers working behind the scenes to bring you today's much anticipated event, Heal the Soil, Save the Earth, a discussion stemming from the film Kiss the Ground. The webcast you'll enjoy today is part of a 4-week celebration of the start of a new green decade. Climate scientists have given us 10 years to turn things around. There are solutions, awesome people, groups, and businesses making amazing progress. So let's all celebrate their achievements, learn about solutions, imagine what we can do, and be inspired to take action. We are very excited about today's program and thankful to the organizers and presenters who have volunteered to make it happen, and to you for joining us. We would like to begin by acknowledging and thanking the Indigenous peoples of this land. We are hosting this event today from the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississauga of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples. It is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples. We also acknowledge that Toronto is covered by Treaty 13 with the Mississauga of the Credit. Today, we respectfully honor this land acknowledgement as a way to recognize the enduring presence and resilience of Indigenous peoples for time immemorial. We also ask participants to reflect on how we are all accountable to these relationships. I'd now like to introduce you to our webcast moderator, Paul Otza. Paul is a retired professor of social science from York University. He is the current chair of Green Neighbours Network of Toronto and was the founding chair of the Toronto Climate Action Network. Paul, please take it away.
Thanks, Helen, and welcome everyone to our EcoFair panel, Heal the Soil, Save the Planet, How to Get Started. If the title sounds familiar, it's because we've taken it from the poster for Kiss the Ground, the inspiring film on regenerative farming that we've been streaming for the EcoFair. For any of you who may have missed it, the streaming link will be active for another 24 hours. If you missed that, you can see the film on Netflix. Kiss the Ground paints an impressive picture of regenerative farming's many benefits. Richer soil, more nutritious food, and a cooler climate as CO2 is gradually drawn down from the atmosphere into a revived and reanimated soil ecosystem. The vision of a whole world transformed by this new way of farming is an exciting one, to say the least. But the grandeur of that vision shouldn't distract us from remembering that regenerative farming takes place on individual farms, often quite small farms, and that it's possible only through the passion and skill and plain hard work of individual farmers. That brings the subject much closer to home, and it raises some important questions. What's it like to be a regenerative farmer? Does it require special training, or is this really something anyone can do? Can you earn a decent living without going deep into debt? And how do you get started on this thing anyway? Where do you begin? And where can you get help? These are some of the questions we'll be looking at today. In the remainder of this first hour, we'll learn about the kinds of challenges facing anyone who takes up regenerative farming, but also about some exciting initiatives that could make the process easier. And we'll hear about some ways that the rest of us can lend a hand up to those who are just getting started. We'll do this with the help of two expert guides. The first, Antonio Gomez, owns and operates Cavaliero Farm, a 65-acre agroecological farm that serves as a teaching center and business incubator for new ecological farmers. He is the founder of Urban Crops, a company that helps new landowners to build and operate their own ecological farms. Our second guide, Sally Miller, is the project manager for the Fair Finance Fund, which provides loans and mentorship to local food and farm enterprises that create social, environmental, and economic benefits. She's also the author of Edible Action, Food Activism, and Alternative Economics and Belongings, The Fight for Land and Food. We'll be hearing from Antonio first about the kinds of challenges that face new farmers, especially those going into regenerative farming. As we'll see, some of the biggest challenges are financial. So that will take us to Sally's presentation, where we'll learn how her company, Fair Finance, has been helping farmers get past these problems. Finally, we'll go back to Antonio to hear about some of the novel solutions he's been pioneering at Cavaliero. Having heard from our speakers, we'll then move into panel format, where they can respond to your questions. That's where all of you come in. As you listen to our speakers, please send us your questions. It's easy, just tap on the chat button at the lower right-hand side of your YouTube screen, then type in your question. So let's go to our speakers. To get us started, Antonio, I have a question for you. After watching the film, I came away feeling that if you could make a go of it, regenerative farming would be an incredibly rewarding way to make a living. But I'm guessing it's not so easy, and maybe it's not for everyone. What would you say about that?
So farming is the hardest thing I've ever done. I started off as an engineer and I've done a lot of other professions, carpentry, photography. And the thing about farming is that it has, you actually need a lot of diverse skills. And when you learn something, you have to wait a whole other year before you get another chance at retrying the situation. So there's a long time period that is needed for you to actually learn and be able to implement what you're learning. And then on top of that, it's nature, it's weather. And especially with climate change and variable weather, it's getting harder to deal with weather on a farm. And then a layer above that even is there's actually a lot of systemic issues and pressure that create circumstances that are basically out of the control of the farmer. So overall, it's a challenging field to get into.
Oh, well, that's very interesting. Let's just see if we can take a little deeper dive into that. I was kind of struck by the fact that some of these are problems that seem to be sort of just things that farmers run into and are part of the whole setup, part of the whole situation of being a farmer, maybe part of some kind of bigger system that's the farmer actually has no direct control over. So is that part of the story here?
Yeah, it took me a while to really get a sense of it, because as an individual, you do have a lot of self-determination and you can evolve and overcome challenges, but there's a lot of things that are really outside the farmer's influence. And so what I would put under the umbrella of systemic is policy, land speculation, and corporations. So these are three big players that are impacting what it means to be a farmer and how farmers can start. So it's here in Ontario, as a farmer here in Ontario, you know, I'm dealing with 4 levels of kind of government, federal, provincial, municipal, and conservation authorities. And so I have to interface with all those levels of government, which adds a lot of burden. And so without diving in too deep, 2 numbers that I like to look at when I'm looking at the systemic influences on farmers is, one, the average age of a farmer in Canada is 62 years old. And then the other thing is that 85% of farmers have off-farm income or jobs, right? And so to me, those 2 numbers are showing us we're in a bad trend, in a non-sustainable trend in terms of having farmers here in Ontario and in Canada. And not enough new farmers are coming into it. And so when we look at who are these new farmers, though, that are getting into it, there's basically 2 types that I've noticed. The first type is a farmer who's basically inheriting a multi-generational farm. So all those big tractors and farm equipment and things like that, those are farms that have been built over the last 60, 70, 80 years, even longer. And the new farmers are basically taking over and continuing with that family operation. So a lot of them still have challenges, and they're not all continuing, right? So some of those are leaving and becoming more corporate farms. But then the other type of new farmer, which is like myself, who didn't have that land and that access to an existing farm, we don't really fit into the system so much in the existing infrastructure and everything that's happening in food and farming. And so what we have to do is we have to start farms where we figure out how to get land, we figure out what to grow. We have to then market, distribute the food, and kind of do all those pieces ourselves. So as new farmers, there is a lot of challenges when it comes to that. So I'll push the land issue a little bit aside. So assuming even you have land, a lot of young farmers do get land taken care of. You know, it's when you're starting a farm business, there isn't a lot of money left over, and you need money to invest in infrastructure and in parts of your business that allow you to grow more food, or enough food to then earn a sustainable living. So I can give you an example. My second year growing, I was making hay. It was my second year making hay. I had a bad year in making hay. And then I basically needed to buy hay going into the winter because I didn't have enough to feed my flock of sheep. And so I bought maybe 20% hay that I needed. And just in that purchase of hay in the winter, I lost all the revenue, not profit, revenue that I had made off those sheep throughout the whole year. And so I was back kind of to square one. And then going into the next year, I started making hay in the spring, and it was a really wet spring. And I basically assumed that the rest of the year was going to be wet. And the equipment I had to make hay was not adequate to deal with the conditions, the weather that was happening that season. And so at that point, I recognized that if I didn't upgrade my equipment to be able to deal with this, that I was going to be in a situation again where at the end of fall, I would need to go buy winter hay to keep my animals over winter. And so I knew that basically I would lose a lot of money, and I would really have to question if I could keep the flock and keep going with that farming enterprise. So luckily I was able to borrow the money I needed so that I could update my equipment, and then I could make the proper hay. And basically since then, I've never bought hay because I can't afford to buy hay. So these types of situations come up, even with someone like me who has a lot of privilege and opportunities. You know, I'm still building a farm business, and I need to access capital in order to overcome small temporary challenges throughout my season.
Yeah, I can see that would be incredibly tough, and especially probably discouraging to a beginning farmer. And I think, you know, I'm just thinking about your example, and I mean, it sounds like in some way, if you'd known about that in advance, about what you're going to need if you want to raise hay, if you want to grow your own hay, and be ready for whatever the weather's going to throw at you, you would have been set up for it. But you're coming to this from a background as a guy in the city, right? So this would all be new.
Yeah, and like my family comes from farming and land management, so I did have family to draw upon and for some of it. But I learned a lot from locals, but it's still hard to get the information. Like, is this a wet spring? Is this early? When to expect what? Without going through a few seasons, you don't get that firsthand experience. And when we don't have the farmers around or people around, then I basically have to experiment. And they're silly experiments that really put me at a lot of risk as a new farmer.
So that would be something that anybody who starts into this kind of farming, or just starts into farming in general without a farming background, they're going to have this kind of knowledge gap, just not having the experience and not knowing quite where to turn, which would be one of the big challenges, right?
Yeah, and often too, I guess, you're starting small, you're learning, and as you learn and you start selling a certain crop, it's popular, you start distributing to a certain market, you have inefficiencies and things that need to be updated, but you're limited on resources. So it's like, where do I spend my resources? And what basically ends up happening when you start growing a crop is that maybe it takes you 2 times longer to that first season to grow it.
Yeah.
And so you put a lot more time into it. And that's basically when you divide up the profit, that's when a farmer's making $2 or $3 an hour, is when they start up that whole process.
Oh, that sounds scary. That's right. So it sounds like as partly as a result of these things, partly a result of knowledge gap, result of just not having the right stuff that you need, you're going to face these major financial challenges that come from not knowing what to do, and therefore losing money in the process. So you suddenly find you don't have instead of thinking you have a regular income, you have one that fluctuates up and down, and sometimes instead of a profit, it's a loss. And you didn't have anything to back you up. That would be a wipeout, probably, right?
Yeah, and even in my, I've been doing this for 10 years, and in the 10 years I've been doing it, I've already met farmers that stopped farming.
Yes, yeah.
Young farmers who had a lot lined up for them to be able to do it, and just reached a point where they were either burnt out, they could no longer afford to work another job to pay for farming, some living situation changed, and they left.
Be
farming.
really discouraging. I can totally understand how that would be hard. And I guess that plus the cost of owning your own land would be prohibitive too. So that's another financial issue that comes into that picture. Well, with thinking of those things, maybe we'll have an opportunity to come back to some of that financial stuff a little later in our panel. But I'm also thinking that maybe some of what you're describing here is part of the way the whole food system relates to your particular kind of farming, to regenerative farming. And maybe there's kind of a sort of failure for the two to fit together, because our food system is based on different ideas and different consumer habits and different cultural attitudes. So you think there might be some kind of gap there that's another hurdle for the regenerative farmer?
Yeah, I would say definitely. I mean, food and farming is ingrained in a lot of our culture. We are agriculture people, right? Like most of the population in the world derives their food and being from this way of growing food, right? In bare fields, basically. And with that comes a lot of baggage and and perception. So for example, I've planted trees around my farm, and I've had complaints from some neighbor or somebody who called the municipality because it was unsightly, or it wasn't that picket fence around the farm that people expected.
Yeah, I can see how that would be a problem as well. Well, you've certainly listed a pretty formidable array of problems, I have to say. for our panel, which is supposed to be inspiring and show people the ways that they can do things. It might seem a little discouraging, but there may be solutions to some of these problems. And that's really what the rest of our panel is about. So I was struck especially by the size and variety of financial problems you face. And I think that sounds like the kind of thing that Sally might be able to help us with. So Sally Miller, if I understand it correctly, that's what your company, Fair Finance, is all about. Can you tell us a little more? What is Fair Finance actually, and how does it work?
Yeah, I can tell you a bit about it. I have some slides too with some pretty pictures of the people we work with. So can you see
Great.
the slides?
Yes.
Okay. So just to start off right at the beginning, it's not my company. It is a nonprofit. We are not.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry.
We have a board of directors, so not in the business of making money. And so that's a sort of important aspect of of what we're doing, which is called social finance. We are the Fair Finance Fund actually comes out of years of research that I had done with farmers, especially people trying to get into farming. And realizing and doing consultations with different groups across the food and farming supply chain, and realizing that one of the big barriers in local food, which we need to have a faster transition to, is capital. So one of the reasons for doing something like the Fair Finance Fund is that we're aggregating capital from a whole bunch of different sources in order to be able to invest into the local food and farm sector. So we invest in local food and farm businesses, nonprofits, co-ops that create social, environmental, and economic benefits. So I think that's sort of the main thing about us. Here's the sort of in a nutshell what we do. We decided to do debt financing rather than equity, where we'd be buying shares in businesses, because a lot of the businesses may be, they're sole proprietor farms that don't want to issue shares. They have to pay money to lawyers to do that and everything. So we're doing debt financing, but trying to make it affordable. We call fair. The interest rate is completely different from credit cards, which we found in a survey a lot of these farmers end up having to rely on because, as Antonio was talking about, they face barriers to capital. So they may be doing direct sales. If they're doing organic or regenerative, they are not recognized by conventional capital as being creditworthy. So they don't fit the conventional risk parameters, even for credit unions, and they get denied they get denied capital from banks, even if they've been in business for like 5 or 6 years. So as you see here, we provide affordable loans up to $200,000. We focus on clients that are doing regional production and local markets, local production, the entire supply chain. And one of the things that's key to social finance is that we actually work with people. So we don't just give them the loan and walk away and expect them to pay. We link them up with people who can help them with specific things they're having trouble with. We promote them like crazy. And looking at the movie, actually, I think one important thing that we decided to do, although about 50% of our loans go to agriculture, we actually decided to do this whole supply chain. And that's because although a lot of our clients are in fact investing in soil health and they're regenerative, some of them, we need to fix the whole food ecosystem. We need a paradigm shift of the whole thing. So we invest from field to field, field to supper to compost to back to the field. So that's our mandate.
Oh, that's fascinating. So it's so you're not only investing in farmers and helping them, but you're also helping with other things like distribution and aggregation and preparation and consumption, waste resource. So that's fascinating. I really love to hear some examples, some indication of the kinds of people and enterprises that you've been supporting, and
Sure.
yeah.
So I'll skip ahead. These slides were about why social finance is needed right now, which is a question that people often ask. And it's, as I said, it's we need, I mean, I think the pandemic has emphasized this even more, that we need a rapid shift. The next generation of farmers are often coming from non-traditional backgrounds. We need the capital system to shift in order to support these people so that we still have a strong Canadian food system.
Yeah.
And that means regional food infrastructure. I mean, a whole bunch of stuff that we've lost recently. So here's some examples. We're very proud of this one. Well, we're proud of all of them. This one,
Yeah.
This one is actually the first hardy fruit orchard in Northern Ontario. They also raise pigs, because of course it takes about 7 years for a new orchard to actually start producing stuff for sale. So they had a base business, and then we've invested in their the pasture, and they're doing a permaculture orchard. So they've taken the pigs in to the area. They haven't even, this is just a trial apple tree that you're seeing in that slide. So they haven't, they're planting the saplings actually this spring. And what they did last year, when it was actually too wet to plant any saplings, they sent the pigs into the fields where they were going to have the orchard, raising the fertility, increasing the soil health naturally. So that's Kipling Ridge. They're in Verner, Ontario. If anybody is up there, they can go visit them. This one is Black River CoOp. Again, they're regenerative. They're combining a sort of extraordinary combination of permaculture practices, multiple land-based businesses that are all part of the CoOp. So the CoOp members are foragers, medicinal herb balm producers. We invested in a 4-season greenhouse for them to extend production, because they're way up north in Matheson. And so that's just an extraordinary example. And again, we require the clients to track their social and environmental impact. So this one is amazing because they tracked their bartering, which what I know from interviewing farmers, the barter is absolutely essential. And Antonio talked about this a bit, like the exchanges that you have with the farmers who are near you. So they tracked their barter and discovered it saved them $60,000 that year. And that was sort of putting a price on what they gave out and then what came to them. And then they also track their biodiversity. So they're tracking wildlife on their land. And so they've got, wonderful example. I have lots more, but I'll let you ask other questions.
Great indicators too. I'm totally fascinated by that. And that reliance on barter, is that something that farmers do quite a lot in general, or is this something that's just getting going, or is it part of people with a kind of regenerative or ecological philosophy about farming?
No, it is actually part. It links every kind of farmer. It's really important. And I've talked to organic or regenerative farmers who are doing something, unusual, and the farmers near them, they might tease them or worry that they're not going to stay in business. But one of my favorite stories is a wheat farmer that came by, an organic farm, and the organic farm had a grain growing that looked like wheat, but it was way earlier than the wheat that's grown in Canada.
I've heard about that grain.
Right. And so he's interested, right? And he goes to the other farmer. He says, how do you get wheat this early? Like you're way ahead of mine. Like, what are you doing? And he's like, it's not wheat, it's spelt. And you look at like Mapleton's Organics, who was one of the first organic dairies in Ontario, and they had sort of the same experience. Like the nearby farmers were worried that they would go out of business, right? That they were doing this weird hippie thing, But after a while, they started to see why it was working. They started to see how, farmers understand when they see good soil health, and they help each other. So I'll give you one more of my favorite stories. I interviewed a farmer who it was her second year. She's doing a 5-acre CSA. She said, I think farmers around here think I'm either a superhero or I'm nuts. And she was a rare thing, which is a farmer who doesn't have any machinery skills, and she tipped over her tractor. And the farmer next door was immediately there helping her get it back up, you know, looking out for her. And that's one of the reasons that the breakdown in farming in Ontario happens, is because if the farming community breaks down, so when land becomes really valuable and farmers retire and they sell it for as much as they can and they move away, it breaks down this farming community. So you have less barter, you have less expertise exchange, and it has been shown to actually break down the agricultural community even faster. So it's actually, so it's not just we don't need one farmer, we need them all, you know, to be able to stay on the farmland.
Like a critical mass you've got to have there, right? If it starts to get tattered and it begins to shred, then you begin to lose those supports.
Yep. Exactly.
Well, that's a really adds to the one of the points that Antonio was making about the kind of systemic aspect of this whole thing, and that's if there's the bigger picture starts to change, then the individual farmer's life becomes a lot more challenging.
Yep.
So I guess part of the challenge we all face who want to try to support and get a regenerative farming system going is getting it up, enough of it up to do that with a community of people to support each other. That's very, very interesting.
That includes, in the research I did for my second book, what I was hearing was that it includes the suppliers and it's the whole supply chain, right? So they need the farm supply places to be there. They need the large animal veterinarians to be there. And again, the large animal vets will move away if there aren't enough farms in that area. And then the other thing that they're facing is if the farming ecosystem community starts to break up, they're driving from one piece of land to another. They've got their giant tractors that are like transformers, right? That are going down. And this is true even for, a mid-sized organic farm or regenerative farm. They do it. They've got, a lot of them have machinery. But if their parcels are separated like that, and in between are people who are not farmers, they get into conflict, and we're getting road rage. We're getting, and all of this, of course, is concentrated. 50% of the best farmland in Canada is right around Toronto. Right in Southwest Ontario, right? And that is where the biggest focus, pressure of development, loss of farmland is happening. So we need good, strong solutions, and part of that, what we're doing, is capital, but we need all kinds of solutions to go with that.
This is a question which I'm just asking you on the fly. We could come back to it in the question period later, but it sounds as though perhaps there need to be some kinds of policy changes to help protect and support farmers and farming localities so that they have a chance to maintain everything that's required for good farming.
Yep. And it's a tricky question, because as urbanites are allowed to speculate in the value of their houses in Toronto, right? I mean, they talk about it all the time. So why shouldn't farmers be allowed to do that? And so if you've got the market economy, if land is submitted to the market economy, they have as much right to speculate on that as we do. And in fact, for farmers, because of the level of debt, the debt has gone up and the amount of money they make per acre has stayed the same. That's generally, they'll say this very explicitly, they'll consider their land their pension. And farmers said
many times.
And all the interviews I did with farmers, I can't believe how many times they told me this sort of sad joke where they're like, "Did you hear about the farmer who won the lottery?" And the journalist asked him what he was going to do with all that money, and he said, "I'm going to farm till it's gone." Like, oh no.
Oh wow. Okay. Well, I'm gathering then that the way in which fair finance intervenes in all this is basically by making loans to people, right? And people in different situations and different parts of that food cycle that you described. And what I understand is that the fund gets its assets from donors and investors. and I'm wondering how that actually works. Could you just
Yep,
tell us a little
I
more
will.
about that?
Yeah, I will, and I'll take you to the so people can see how it's working right now. We actually don't have an offering statement out right now, and I could talk about why that is. But what we do is we issue community bonds. We're a nonprofit, so we can't issue shares, but we issue community bonds, and that they work just like a Canada savings bond without the backing of the government. So they're $5,000 and $50,000 bonds. They're the ones that we've issued before. They're 5-year terms, 2% interest on the 5,000 and 3 to 4% interest on the 50,000. So generally in social finance, people are investing not to make a ton of money. They're investing because they want to invest in their beliefs and their values. So when we did this that I'm describing is the offering that we did before the pandemic, when the interest rates plummeted. So we were actually a bit below market value. We still market rates. We still raised a lot of money. We also get capital from non-repayable contributions, which can come from foundations or from government support. And so the government is sort of attentive to social finance right now. So we did have a little bit of capital from the government, and that for individual and institutional investors, that grant capital is called first loss capital. So that reduces the risk for them, knowing that if somebody defaulted on the loan, the first loss would be that grant capital that we, that has 0% interest that we don't have to return. And that would protect the investors. We have lots of ways of protecting the investors, but that's sort of one of the key ones, is that they're not the first in line if there's actually a default. Yeah.
For the investors. But it sounds like at the moment there isn't anything for small investors. Probably many people watching this webinar who might be interested in putting in $5,000 or $10,000 or something like that. Is that likely to come back again?
Yep, we have an offering statement signed and ready to go that'll probably be out in a it's hard to say, in a month or two. It depends how many loan applications and loan clients, how much goes out, because we balance it. So one of the things is that all the capital that comes to the Fair Finance Fund is put out in loans. We don't use any of it for operations. So that means that we balance. We have to allocate the loans, and we can't take too many investments because we owe the money back. And you can see right now our interest rates are actually quite high in relationship to the rest of the world. So we have a waiting list. So people who contact us will be the first ones contacted when we issue the new offering. And really what happened in the pandemic was that our client applications slowed down because people were being cautious as the economy was in turmoil. And then they were also being able to access federal programs to help them get through this problem, which is exactly right. That's great. I love it that the government stepped in, so that was good. But we had a slowdown on the loan applications. So it's ramping back up, and I expect the investment offering will go out again pretty soon. Yeah.
Great. Well, that's extremely interesting, and it looks as though this is what you're doing is a way that certainly takes some of the worst bumps off the road, or smooths out some of the worst bumps for farmers. The kinds of things that Antonia was talking about that could be fatal to somebody getting going, but this makes it just a temporary setback.
And I should add that one of the things that we try to do, and this is in line with the term fair finance, is that we don't go up and down on the interest rate. We're basically set an interest rate for the loan clients and then set an interest rate for the investors. That means that we'll be able to be an evergreen fund, self-sufficient long term. So if suddenly the interest rate in the banks goes way up, we wouldn't go up. We just continue, so right now our investment rates look really good, but then, we're just not chopping and changing, the way a lot of speculation would do.
Yeah, that's good. Well, it's
sort of like fair trade, right?
That's right. Yeah, so that keeps that all steady. Yeah. Great. Well, this is fascinating. Thanks so much. And it's now time for us to get back to Antonio, who's going to be telling us more about his Cavaliero Farm and how it helps beginning farmers meet a range of other challenges, many of which we discussed in the opening part of the webinar with Antonio. So, Antonio, I realize that Cavaliero, obviously it's a farm where you do the usual things, but I get the sense from your website that it's a lot more than that. And that's, there's something, another kind of vision perhaps that's guiding what you're up to. I wonder if you could tell us a little bit about that and how you got started.
Sure. So I'm just trying to get up pictures here, but I can't seem to figure it out. But yeah, there's lots on the website, so I'll just keep my beautiful face here and talk about it. Because like Sally was mentioning, actually, if you climb up to the top of the CN Tower on a clear day, you're looking at like a third to half of the Class 1 soil in all of Canada. It's world famous soil. It's something that takes a long time to build, and we're losing it quickly because we're not farming this prime land. Canada looks so big, but when you go farther north, you don't have those same growing conditions. So I started Cavaliero Farm as I was learning more about food and farming, and I wanted to get on my own farm. And basically I had observed two big trends that I saw a lot around. So just like in the documentary, Gabe Brown, Gabe Brown has a book, and he has a very common farmer story where farmers kind of go the conventional approach, the one that's encouraged by agricultural institutions, and is kind of, you can buy the tractors and do those kinds of things. And people have to kind of fail in that world and then restart and move into more of a regenerative approach. So I'd see a lot of that. And that wastes a lot of time and resources, right? Everybody doesn't have that. And then the other thing I saw a lot of was one person or maybe a couple spearheading a farm, like a regenerative farm, and trying to create one. And then again, the problem there is it takes more than one or two people. It takes a lot of different resources and skills and a community, really. And so when you have one person try to do it, they'll get burnt out. They won't be able to accomplish it. They'll move on to something else. And so basically, these kinds of trends, I'm seeing them a lot, and basically not enough people are building these regenerative farms. So in building Cavaliero, what I wanted to do was not only build the farm, but learn how to build a better process that new people who want to build these farms can use to build these farms faster. Okay, so the first year, all I did was observation. I just talked to neighbors, spent lots of time on the land, just observed what the plants would tell me, what the animals would tell me, what my senses would tell me, because I want to build a farm that works with nature. That's what a regenerative farm is. And so it's about letting the landscape reveal what should happen. And then over the next 5 years, basically I've implemented different systems. So now on our farm, we sell lambs, we sell eggs, we sell vegetables, and it's all to the local community. And on top of that, I created this community farming system. Basically, I created a framework for what I call community farms. And so what a community farm is these farms that are, they're producing food for local people, they're doing local distribution, they're using some sort of organic type production methods and styles. They have goals of self-sufficiency, so not just in terms of making their own compost and having their own fertility, but also like energy and resources, so that the farm over time, is less dependent on external forces and kind of has its own sustainability built into it. So that's what I call a community farm. And so I built a framework for building these types of community farms that people could come together and build the farm, just like Cavaliero Farm and just like the ones I've been copying. And basically we play 4 main games. So we have a workday and event planners, so like farm to table events, work days, planting days, things like that. So how to do those.
But you mentioned them as games. Like, what do you mean by games? How does that work?
Yeah, basically, it's a framework that I use and other farmers use, and it's a dialogical game. So when anybody visits the farm and wants to interact with us, or let's say a farmer wants to come and grow a crop, or a community member wants to volunteer or contribute, anything like that, or like Sally was mentioning, you know, this barter and trade, like um, I have a car, like mechanic to repair it, electrician to run in wires. So anytime I need to interact with the community, I use this as a framework, and just through dialogue, we end up playing the game. So some people don't realize they're playing the game, and then other people, if they want to learn more, they actually get to play the game with us, basically.
Mm-hmm.
And so the game is a framework that it makes us focus on what we're trying to do, our kind of goals and our vision for the farm, and it helps us kind of eliminate a lot of wasted energy and not working on the right things. Because a challenge with farming is it's so endurance based, like physically and mentally and spiritually, that you don't have the reserves to make good decisions all the time. So you need like a framework to fall back on that can then you can count on moving you forward, and as a community too. So we have a project games, so that's what we use to put in infrastructure and things we use on the farm. Then we also have a land planning game. This is how we decide where to plant vegetables, what crops to grow, where to plant trees, where to move the animals. So all these.
So is that sort of like a brainstorming process, or trying to just imagine what you actually do in one of those situations? You're trying to figure out where to plant your crops, for example. So
Yeah, so the land planning game, basically, you know, you have these crops you want to grow because there's like a market demand for them.
yeah.
So then as farmers, we can come together and we could be like, okay, where's the best piece of land to grow this crop right now? We need to put it in the ground in 2 weeks. Where's the best place? What has the best conditions? You know, like I'm going to plant these carrots. I need a really fine seed bed, and I can't have a lot of weeds. So these kind of needs of the different crops can be discussed, and as a group, we make the best decision. And then over time, what we develop is standard processes. So, you know, now when we plant carrots on our farm, we have a standard process that we've developed together, you know, step 1, 2, 3, 4, and we can deploy it all the time, right? And so whenever we need to make decisions, if it's an easy decision, something we've done before, we can follow what we've done before and found works. But then when something comes up and is different, like maybe it's a really wet spring, something we're not used to, we at least have a foundation and a place to start a discussion and a process where as a group, we make the best decision. And kind of the power of that is it's not so much the decision that's important, but it's the process we took. And the process gives us a lot of confidence, and I don't know, it makes you feel better knowing that like everybody's on board and we're doing this together, and whatever the outcome is, it just is what it is, but we're doing our best. It's like the best approach.
Yeah. So I'm just wondering now, suppose I were to come to you as somebody who was really just dying to get into regenerative farming, but I didn't have any capital, couldn't go out and buy one of those farms right away, and I didn't know anything either. So would you be able to help train me, or what would you do with me to help me at least figure out where I begin and how to start doing what I want to do?
Yeah, so it depends. You know, we have some new farmers or local food businesses that we provide coaching. So regular coaching, they might be farming off-site, not even on our farm. And we provide regular coaching and kind of mentorship.
Mm-hmm.
And so we do that through video and through phones, and the occasional site visit, either going to the farm or them coming to our farm. Then for some other people, we have more of a regular program where they come to our farm to develop skills and experience working on our farm, seeing some of the patterns. And then along with that, they would do their own little project on our farm. So let's say you're interested in growing a certain crop because you recognize a market potential. So around Toronto, half the people are from other countries. So we have a lot of farmers or potential farmers that come to us and they go, hey, in my community, we love this crop. If I could grow it, I'm pretty sure I could sell it. And so we help them figure out an approach and a strategy to growing that crop, doing the right experiment to learn the process of growing that crop, and then also marketing that crop, distributing the crop. So kind of the whole picture of what it takes to grow a crop and sell it and distribute it and all that.
So you're really well set up to help with the knowledge gap that would be such an issue for new farmers, then, especially those going into this new kind of farming where your typical heritage farmer wouldn't know how to advise you.
Yeah, it's kind of an interesting space. So I might farming is complicated and complex. It's not that we're saying we know how to do everything. It's just we think our approach of working together and learning together is a better approach than one person trying to figure it out and learning on their own, kind of that approach of reading some books, trying it out themselves. This is more of a hybrid where we focus on learning. So the whole system and our process is how do we maximize the learning and that you're doing, minimize the risk so farmers can't take on a lot of risk. So we want to learn with the least amount of risk and make smart incremental changes and grow. A common problem farmers have is, let's say, with my sheep business. So I have lambs. First 2-3 years, I start producing lambs. I'm selling lambs. It's going good, but obviously I'm not selling enough lambs to really make a livable income. So, a kind of an easy, intuitive solution that a lot of farmers do is okay, so I'll just double my sheep, right? If I have double the sheep, I'll double my lambs, and then that'll give me double the money. But what ends up happening is all the imperfections in your process. So all the extra time it took you to do this that you didn't account for when you just had a smaller flock. Well, now you have a bigger flock, and all of a sudden those inefficiencies add up to a lot of time. And it unravels a bunch of new complexity that you couldn't see when you had a smaller flock. And so most farmers, when they do that initial growth, they end up finding they make less money because of these inefficiencies and things they didn't take account of. So having an approach where you have other farmers who you can share what you're doing and what plans you're planning, and they can give you feedback and to refine your plan before you implement it. And having a really tight experiment where you've kept track of everything, so what went into what you grew and what you did, allows us to work in our minds basically, and instead of doing it in the real world and investing a lot of resources.
So it sounds, if I was going to try to generalize it, say it sounds like what you're doing at Cavaliero, quite in addition to just the farming part of it, is that you've got a kind of way of building, creating, if you like, and then sharing knowledge about farming that makes it easier for people who've never done this before to find a way to begin and get support to minimize their risks and problems as they go along.
Yeah, and have realistic expectations. I was just doing, I do a land assessment for landowners, and I was just doing one yesterday, and it's always kind of the same thing. New farm, they want to start farming it, and they go, we're thinking of just starting with 5 acres, and 5 acres is huge. It's just like a massive piece of land. It's a huge experiment, and it's when you don't have a reference, you know, when you don't have a bunch of startup farms you can go visit, or more experienced farmers you can go see, and operations that are closer to yours, we tend to make guesses and really find overestimate, you know, like try to grow way more and underestimate what's involved in really getting to that goal. And so it's really useful. Like I made a lot of mistakes when I started. When I started farming, I worked with other farmers. We had like a cooperative, and we grew plants, we sold plants, we grew things together. And it's just, I still made those mistakes. And, you know, if I had a little bit of a better process as a young new farmer, you know, you can avoid a lot of that. Because like I mentioned, a lot of people do try to get into farming, and they just, for different reasons, they burn out. They're not making enough money. You know, it's hard to keep working 4 or 5 seasons and not making money, especially when you have to repair your car or your truck. You know, and these expenses are big. Like, for example, on my regenerative farm, I spend maybe $750, let's say, in terms of diesel use. So I have machines to build ponds, to build roads, build gardens, right? You need machines here in Canada. It's a big part of farms. You know, but I spend $3,500 on driving my truck around. So my personal vehicle cost me a lot more than it cost me to run my farm. Right. But unfortunately, I can't just live on my farm. I got to leave the farm to get supplies, to food. Right. So
those are big problems. Now, I certainly can see how what Sally offers in loans can help to address some of those financial problems that you're describing. Is there any way that you're able to help people with those types of costs?
Yeah. So the there's a lot of different strategies and mindsets. So for example, one thing is, if you are in a hurry to do something, you're going to pay more. It's going to cost you more. So like I meet a lot of landowners or people who want to live on farms or work on a farm, you know, but they always say, like, I want to do it in 10 years. You know, right now I'm doing this, but in 10 years, I'll get the farm and I'll start it. And one thing I tell them is, like, you can't speed up nature and time. It takes time to learn and to learn about the land. And then another thing is, when you're trying to get a farm started quickly, because, you know, this is the year I'm starting a farm, that's when you buy expensive equipment. That's when you invest in too much infrastructure. That's when you, you know, you hire somebody who's too expensive, and all these things add significant costs. And just like Sally was mentioning, that one farm bartered $60,000 worth of stuff. Like, I save multiple thousands of dollars worth of things every year, and it's based on me making relationships with people based on food, and also having this approach where I know what my goals are and what I'm working towards, but I give myself time. And in that space of time, we come up with creative solutions. So for example, one creative solution I had last year, I needed to dig out one of my ponds. I didn't have the right equipment for it. So I hadn't done this in 2 years, but then I ended up meeting a construction worker who needed a space to park his excavators over the winter. And so in exchange for him parking his excavators on my farm, I got to use the excavator to dig up my pond. So, you know, I just had to buy some diesel fuel, but it's a fraction of the cost of.
Totally. Yeah, that's amazing. That's a great example. Yeah, it comes back to that idea of, as you said, relationships and connections to a community of people out there where you can do these kinds of things, and everybody knows everybody else, and that's how you make it work. Well, that's fascinating. There was one thing that I wanted to ask you about that you'd mentioned earlier about, you know, this problem of young farmers getting any access to land, and I understand that, like, to get anything like a farm, even a small farm, you're going to be out a couple $1 million at least. And so if you're young and energetic and you like to be a farmer, maybe even know something, but you can't get a farm, how do you do it? Is there a way around that?
Yeah, so land is extremely expensive, and you need to have, it's basically cash money. You can't get a mortgage on a farm, right? So you need assets. But there is a huge opportunity to get on other people's land, basically, because there is less and less farmers. There's actually more and more land available. And a lot of the people I find now, there has been changes. Like I think last year I really started noticing it. There's more people who are moving to farmland because they actually want to live there versus people buying farmland for just an investment, like speculative, but not living there. There's more people that are buying the farmland but actually wanting to live in these rural communities, but they themselves are not going to become farmers. They're not quitting their jobs that paid to buy that farm, right? It's the only thing they might want to do is like a homestead, so have like a garden and have a nice space, right? They obviously want to live on a nice farm. And so the opportunity I'm seeing a lot of now is to create the relationship between a landowner and a young farmer. And so what we've done at Cavaliero Farm is we've basically created that framework that allows those two parties to partner up. Because if the landowner isn't on board with the vision and what, you know, and they want to invest in the land, then it's too high risk, because a farmer needs kind of an assurance that they're going to be there a number of seasons. And especially for regenerative farming practices, like my farm was a certified organic farm before we bought it. And even then, I have had fields that were in horrible shape because an organic farmer can't use pesticides or herbicides. They actually rely more, or they can rely more on machines and tilling. And so because of all this tractor machining and tilling, I had fields that were in very poor shape. And so compared to some fields on my farm, and the poorest field and like a good field, I get 3 or 4 times more production out of a good field. So even on my organic farm, I had to manage that bad land in a way that it starts to improve. And it took a few years to notice the improvements. So I'm seeing more plants now. I have more water retention. The topsoil is growing, and now I can grow things. Whereas in the past, when I first got there, I had fields that didn't produce anything for two or 3 years. Yeah.
That's very, very interesting. Well, I see actually that we're running to the end of our time here for these presentations, but we still will be having lots more of an opportunity to talk, because as you and Sally have been telling us all this interesting stuff about what you're doing and the way it helps, our audience has been busily writing out their questions for us. And I have a nice pile of questions waiting here. We'll see if we can get through them. So we're going to move into our panel mode now. And I'd like to begin with a question that connects with something that both of you talk about a little bit, and that has to do with the relationship between the regenerative farming, ecological farming on the one hand, and the rest of us out here who are not farmers, who might like to visit a farm and learn more, or maybe be there for a day or something like that. But I think that something that we're all wondering is, what is there that we could be doing at home in our own lives, maybe doing in getting involved with government policies about farming and starting to try to lobby for things. I'd love to hear what each of you might have to suggest about that. What are the ways that we can help what regenerative farmers are doing and help to spread this incredibly important development? So Sally, do you want to take a first go at that?
Okay, there's so many things you can do.
I say that.
I made a couple of notes of the ones that I think are really important. So starting right in your backyard, in addition to growing food, this is a sort of my new thing for urban areas. Keep your soil covered. So this is one of the things that the regenerative farmers know, that people are really starting to look at. Even conventional farmers are starting to keep cover crops on and things like that. It makes a huge difference. The amount of erosion that happens from an uncovered soil acre is horrifying.
Mm.
And it takes thousands, millions of years to rebuild that soil. So number one, keep your soil covered. So just because it's November, don't rip all your plants out. If you group tomatoes or something, I just let them fall down until I'm ready to plant something again, and then I take them out. The other thing that's really on my mind right now, so our clients were our loan clients, they were all deemed essential services because they're in food and agriculture. So during the pandemic, they all had to pivot to doing online marketing and safe deliveries. So it was an incredible effort that they made, and they succeeded in. And a lot of them actually had, their sales went up because a lot of people have turned to buying local food in concerns about the economy or concerns about a lot of different people handling their food during COVID. So I think my second message is don't stop that, because the worst possible thing that could happen right now is for all these local food farmers who have been supplying people throughout the pandemic coming to your house. If for them to have put the investment into the infrastructure to be able to do online marketing and safe delivery, and then just to have that stop when people can get out of their houses again. So it's, be loyal. Like we're actually trying to start a loyalty program that could be used by any farm, just to so that people, it's just something.
Oh, what a great idea.
Yeah, I mean, people don't understand how important it is to sort of stick by the farmers and not just sort of switch around. I mean, that's true for restaurants too, and independent stores and all that. I'll give you one more thing to mention, and this is the answer to the government question. So I'm sort of moving outwards here.
Yeah, good, sure.
In terms of the policy, there's a couple of things. One is that the government has started to look at social finance, and the kinds of investments that we need to build the local food system. Not just us, but all the other possibilities and ways of doing that. They did announce that they were putting 750 million into that. It's been delayed because of COVID. And one of the things that I believe is that, in fact, these are the people that fed us in a lot of cases during COVID. So why not invest in them even more now than we were thinking of before? Yeah, and then the other big issue, back to something Antonio was talking about, also, this is a government issue. It's actually really difficult to legally do community farms in the way that people want to, which is where they'd be able to live together in a sort of, that they'd be able to live on the farm. And that has to do with sort of very basic regulations about how many houses can be on farmland, and restrictions against severance, which makes sense. But really, the point is that we want to keep it in farmland. It's not that we don't want farmers living on that, right? Yeah. So we really need. So I've worked with lots of people who are trying to start farm co-ops, and it is so tricky, and it really depends on how the municipality is feeling about it. So people who are really interested in this can look at communityfarms.ca, which is the British Columbia initiative around community farms, which is way ahead of Ontario right now. And there's something called the Foodlands Trust, which is foodlands.org, that goes along with them. So that's the money that keeps these community farms going. And a lot of them are land trusts, so they are now in perpetuity protected as farmland. But there are about 25 of them. They're not all co-ops, but a lot of them, the kind of model that Antonio is talking about. So it's really inspiring, and we've brought people from that initiative to Ontario over and over again to try to get more of that going here.
Oh, that's exciting. Sounds like an amazing idea. Yeah.
I see somebody's asking, just a quick answer to a question there. The 750 million I mentioned is federal.
I was going to ask you the same. So
yeah, sorry. Yeah, that's federal.
Thank you. Yeah. So, Antonio, do you want to add anything on that subject?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, food is interesting because everybody eats every day, and the decisions we make daily, even though they don't seem like a lot, actually can have a big impact. A huge place of impact in our food system is the supermarket. And I mean, if people ask managers and ask where the food comes from and ask questions there, those are big places of concentrated power, and there's a lot of impact there because the supermarkets are trying to make money off you and deliver you what you want, and if people really start asking questions, and they'll address them, and it's worked well in a lot of other countries. Another thing that's really important and maybe doesn't seem like a lot is just really sharing food together and talking about food culture. We have a lot of richness in food culture, so asking people what foods they eat, why they eat those, how they're prepared. We need to bring back like a food and farming literacy and that connection, because we're all connected to the weather and to the land. It's just about whether we know the connection, or are we just using the packaging at the grocery store to give us that
So are there
reference?
some things we could do? I mean, us city folks who are excited about this, are there some actual things we could do to help build that, to help recover farming literacy?
Yeah, it's share food. Talk about the food. Talk
Yeah.
about how you're eating it, how you're preparing it, what the ingredients are that went in, like whole ingredients.
Mm,
And that will push people to less processed foods, and actually knowing what things look
yeah.
like. Yeah, and that grows to like farm to table events and things. But I mean, we really eat every day, and it's just an opportunity to talk about food together. And then another thing is spend time in nature. Like as regenerative farmers, we use forests and natural landscapes as references, and they teach us a lot. And so spending time in forests and walks in parks and these outdoor spaces, and we have a beautiful city that does have a lot of it. These start to imprint in us, and they start to become references. And then when we're making decisions, we're going to value these spaces more because they are important to us. And it's kind of one of those things, if you don't use it, you lose it. And it can have a huge impact and a consciousness awareness in our communities. And then the last one is, like visiting farms is great. There's a lot of farms and they definitely appreciate your visits. But you can have your own garden. A garden is like kind of the ultimate foodie experience. The food that you grow from your garden, and being part of its life cycle and connecting to the dirt. Like these things have huge impacts on our biome, our gut, improve our brain flow, creativity, energy. So just these simple acts of gardening, even though it might seem like, oh, the garden is only for a few months a year, or I don't grow all my food. It's just making those connections that don't seem like a lot, but they snowball over and over. And like I've been doing this for 10 years, and every year I grow more of my food, I learn more about it, but it's fun because I'm always learning, and I get to eat things that is not available in a supermarket, and it changes. So it's more, to me, I just enjoy the lifestyle, but I think it's accessible to a lot of people in just one meal at a time, and it grows over time.
Yeah, that's fascinating. Those are
Can I
all be very enjoyable. Yes, and really, really sound worthwhile. Sally.
just to add, because I think there's a gap too that we're in what we're talking about. Shout out to urban agriculture, which is absolutely part of the solution and is huge. And we actually miss the importance of it because in Toronto, it's not even counted anymore in Statistics Canada. People are growing more and more food. So even if people don't have a backyard, there's community gardens. There's getting involved with the community garden places all over Toronto.
Yeah.
But there's also, and then I mean, all of this is sort of a spectrum here. If you look at Hamilton actually passed very progressive bylaws that allowed urban farming, which is huge in some of the American cities that are recovering from
Yeah.
I mean,
That's
the American cities like Detroit, where
yeah.
there was white flight out of Detroit, and just this amazing stuff that's happening with the Black Food Security Network in Detroit, building urban farming, growing their own food, and then and then the prices of the housing starts going up because it's starting to be a really great place to be.
Yeah.
So that's always as part of the struggle. But there's also the urban land trust movement. To me, dovetails with the farmland trust movement. So,
and I have actually a question from someone else in our audience that comes back to that very subject of farmland trust. And the viewer says, do we need the government to purchase farmland and create a farmland trust? And where farmers would have 50 or 100-year leases but don't own the land. Is that something that could be done? Has it been done? Where is that? Where are we with that right now?
I could start. I've done a lot of research on this in my book on belongings on land and food. So it is a great model. When I interviewed about 50 farmers about their farmland, their relationship to the land, and how to keep it. It was clear that what they wanted was to know that they were going to be there for a long time. At the same time, part of the results of that research is to say that they were uncomfortable with the land trust model. So it is a solution, but it needs to be done in consultation with the farmers, because the problem is that, as I said earlier, if it's your pension and it turns into a land trust, you don't have your pension anymore. So I mean, we could give farmers a pension for growing food for us for so long or something, I mean, but there has to be a recognition that the trust model needs to work for them as well. So one of the things that's being done has actually been done by the Toronto Regional Conservation Authority, is to give longer term leases. So up to now, that public land that was farmed near Toronto would be a 1-year lease. You didn't know if you're going to be there next year. So this is like the Rouge Park farmers and that kind of thing. Now they have 5-year rolling leases. If you go over 5 years, my understanding is that you have to go to the Ministry of Natural Resources. So right now, 5 years, but it's a rolling lease. So if you're going to be evicted from that land, you have 5 years. And it's huge, because it means that they'll invest in perennials, they'll build fences, they'll do the kind of thing you wouldn't do if you thought you might be gone in a year.
Yes, I guess part of that is asking, are there things like that could be done that would make it more profitable and more secure proposition to farm in a way that starts building soil, where building soil is a priority. If you're only there for the short term, you're going to be really interested in what you can make each year, and not much interested in whether you're building up the productive capital in the land, you could say, the fertility of the land for future generations.
Yeah, one thing I'd add to that, I've seen a lot of farmers get access to farmland, just like here's your farm, with no infrastructure. And infrastructure can cost a lot and takes time to put in place. And the problem we're having, especially around Toronto, is like a lot of our farm infrastructure. So not only the communities have like died somewhat and left, but like, the farm roads, the farm buildings, the electrical systems, the water management systems, they've broken, they've stopped functioning. So, it's not just give a farmer a plot of land, they're going to need infrastructure to be able to produce food and to handle it and to distribute it. And I find that often people don't recognize or not aware of that hurdle, which is really significant. Like, I probably on our farm, I spent better part of 2 or 3 years, and I'm still putting in infrastructure, but I mean, I spent a lot of time seeing what worked, learning, which wells, discovering the wells that were even on the property. Like it takes a good amount of time in like repairing roads so you can access, fields. And fences are very valuable infrastructure, and it's just something that's been decaying. And now we want to reinvest and get things going. Like there's a delay because you need to make all that work for farmers.
Right, but to do it would pay off in the long term if there is a way to get that done. I have another question that's about, I guess it takes us back to policy, and it's a different aspect of this. And this viewer says some government programs don't encourage best practices or even have negative impacts on soil enrichment. Very much what we were talking about in terms of how governments can help with that. How do we, in terms of doing the right things, how do we navigate with the political foxes in Queen's Park that guard the chicken house? And then the viewer says an example of a current government program would be the corrugated paper sludge program, something I and perhaps our other viewers don't know about. So be interested in your thoughts about that. Either of you want to pick that up? Let's try. Should we try to make it more specific?
I mean, so our agricultural policy is run out of Guelph, I think, pretty much. And, you know, you have Guelph University is like the institution that's creating the academic side of the information on agriculture. And then you have the federal level runs in Guelph and a lot of the Ontario level. It's kind of interesting that, you know, everybody else is in Ottawa, but agriculture is in Guelph. And it's an interesting question and you know, something that I'm still piecing together, but I'm struck when I drive into Guelph or near Guelph that the farms start looking better and they have more infrastructure and, you know, solar panels and nicer looking barns. So I think policy and what's happening is really different from community to community. You know, some communities are doing better, farm communities. Some areas still have real productive farms. Other farming communities looks like land speculators have bought everything up. So there's different trends and things happening. But it, like, to me, a lot of the policy is not applicable to me. I mean, most farmers are that big farm, you know, big tractors and multi-generational operations. Like a lot of the policy seems to be catered to that. So, you know, something like Fair Finance Fund is like unique to the small farmers. There isn't a lot of stuff and seems like policy that that comes out at that level. And I think a big reason is because so many of the big farms that are growing our food are tied up into the system and part of that.
If I wanted to support one or two organizations that really take this issue on and are doing things, whether it's lobbying or whatever else might be helpful, can either of you make recommendations? Who's active in this space, and who can we support in helping to create an environment, a policy environment that's much more conducive to ecological and regenerative farming?
Well, I'm a member of the National Farmers Union. So
exactly.
In Canada, we have three, like every farmer who has a farm business number has to be part of like a national organization that basically, you know, has whatever members are part of that. So I'm a member of National Farmers Union. National Farmers Union represents values of family farms, of food sovereignty. And so they are the body that is pushing for better policy for family farms and for local farms and food sovereignty and that and whatnot. So someone can become, you can become an associate member. So as not as a farmer, you can become an associate member of the National Farmers Union. You can contribute to that. You can participate in organizing in that organization. I don't know if Sally knows others.
No, that's a really good place to start. They're doing amazing work, especially on climate resilience and things like that. I have one policy issue that I do keep bringing up, which is absolutely essential for the capital part of this transition that we need. So Canada Revenue Agency actually allows a tax credit for people to move their RSPs into community investment programs. This has to be implemented by each province. So Ontario has not implemented it. If you go and look at FarmWorks, which is a community investment co-op in Nova Scotia, you can see the incredible impact of this. So they've raised over $2 million, which has gone into food and agriculture in Nova Scotia. And and their ability to raise money is because they get that tax credit so that people can move their RSPs into community projects. So we don't have that. I was kind of waiting to start the Fair Finance Fund until that got implemented here, and then we just like we got to go ahead. We need this, but it is absolutely crucial. And there are lots of different organizations who are looking at this, but especially in the social finance world. So we are, but other social finance funds as well. So check out FarmWorks. They're one of the inspirations for the Fair Finance Fund.
That's FarmWorks, it's called?
Yeah, FarmWorks.
Okay.
It's farmworks.ca probably.
Farmworks.ca. We can take both of those down and put them in an email that we'll be sending out to our viewers, basically with any of the recommendations or connections that we mention here. So those two will get. Perhaps the two of you could just send us links, web links to those, and we'll send them on to everyone who's watching. That's very interesting. And speaking as someone who is an associate member of the National Farmers Union, I have to say it's been very interesting. It looks like they're doing fantastic work. So now I wanted to turn to a farming question, which gets right down to how you do regenerative farming. And it's something that's we've often heard about, the problem of invasive species that impacts and limit crop production. What can be done to manage them without recourse to any kind of pesticides or other chemicals to limit them on the farm? What's the strategy for dealing with all that? Especially if you're not tilling, if you're not plowing.
Yep. So I guess that falls under my farming wheelhouse.
Yep.
Farmers actually don't have the perspective of weeds so much. That's like more of a new cultural phenomenon. Where you have bad plants and good plants. So on an ecological farm, you have plants you don't want as much of, and you have plants that you want more of. So what you do is you try to discourage the ones you don't want, and you try to manage the ones you do want in a more positive way. And so with invasives and plants like that, what often happens with an invasive is they have some sort of niche or ability that is allows them to exploit the environment. So they might not have a competitor or a certain time of year, or there's something going on where that new invasive can thrive and outcompete the native kind of plants. And so the challenge there is like, you can't go around ripping out all the plants you don't want, but you have to encourage and support the native plants, and then so that they win the race and kind of choke out the non-native plants. That's kind of the approach, but also to look at the root cause, like why are all these invasive plants here? So where did they come from? How did they get here? And then what kind of environment are we creating? So in our push to make things good for cars and tractors, we've eliminated a lot of the niches or environments that allowed a lot of native plants, and we've increased certain types of ecosystems. So for example, we don't have a lot of forests. Like this whole area would have been big forests, and we no longer have those forests. What we have is little patches of trees that are surrounded by fields. And so we have more of this type of pattern, which then is going to allow for certain plants like the Virginia creeper, right? A climbing vine that thrives at the edge of trees and fields. And so if we create more of this environment, you're going to have more opportunity for these types of invasive plants to go. And so as a regenerative farmer, what I do is, sometimes I do get out there and I rip out the plants that are invasive in my garden, my vegetable garden that I don't want. But then, other times it's about strengthening the plants I do want and encouraging them and working with them so that the other plants just stop growing.
Mm-hmm. Very interesting. Yeah. So part of what you're saying, I think it has to do as well with the fact that these problems come up as a result of some kind of an interaction between all the things that we're doing industrially and in terms of real estate and in terms of highways and transportation and so on, which begins to create other factors that come into the picture. And in a way, it sounds as though that takes us back to the point about our bigger culture and our whole way of life and the way it connects to something like regenerative farming. And I guess my question about that is, do you think there's a way to do regenerative farming without also producing a large scale change in the way we're all living, in our attitudes and our life and the kinds of things that we value? Are these things really tied so closely together that we need to be doing both at the same time?
Well, I have an answer to this that I like to give.
Okay.
Basically, we almost can't be doing any worse. We're all rock bottom here. I mean, we're all driving around 4-ton vehicles every day to go pick up one meal. We're very inefficient. We use a lot of resources to not get a lot done in a way. And it's not that we have to give up something and go live in a cave or go back to, to something like that. We have a lot of technology. It just seems our management and our culture is not up to pace, basically.
Mm-hmm.
And so we have an opportunity to just rethink how we live, what we value, and what we want to see more of, and then put our resources into those things and our time. And there's a way, especially here around Southern Ontario. I mean, we really do have great weather. Even though climate change is affecting us, it's nowhere near the same impacts as a lot of places in the world. We have a lot of resources. We have a lot of intellectual capital. We have people from all around the world. We have a huge opportunity to just rethink how we do things. And to me, it's I've changed the way I live. Like when I get into the car to go drive and do an errand, I'm always doing 4 or 5 errands. I don't do one thing in my car, and that's because I moved out to a farm, right? So it's a little different, but I'm driving a heck of a lot less. And so I just see we're kind of at rock bottom. We're very inefficient in a lot of things we do in our life, and it's just up to us to think a little different, and we can we can live a lot more sustainable. One really good thing about connecting to your food, like I think people want to do good and live in a good way and be positive on the planet. It's very intuitive that you don't want to ruin your home and where you live because it's not good for you. But the problem is when we don't have real feedback. So in a world where pollution happens in another country, where resources come from another country, we're left to guess as to what our impacts are. But the more we pull it local where we can see our impacts, so if we're going to a farm and we're eating food from that farm and we're seeing our food waste go there, and then we're seeing what comes out of it and all that, like then it makes it easy for us to make good decisions. And I think that's at the heart of what everybody wants.
Yeah, fascinating. Yes, and Sally, anything you'd like to add on that point?
I think it was very well said, but I would just add, I think it's very important to realize that the things we're talking about, changes in capital, changes in the methods in agriculture, to me, soil health is part of creating wealth. The soil is our wealth, and making these investments in environmental methods, protecting farmland and things like that, that is part of making a stronger economy. And I think we have a moment this year of actually being able to really rethink what we're doing, exactly like Antonio is saying. So it's a really exciting moment where we can tie the economy and the social and the environment together.
Well, I think that's a fantastic note for us to conclude on. And I want to thank both of you for giving us a tremendous amount of really interesting insights into how this farming works in our own local setting in Ontario, the kind of challenges, and some great ways to deal with those. And I think a lot of food for thought, if I could use that phrase, for ways that we can get involved and can be doing things in our own lives to help support this. So I really want to thank you so much for being here and sharing your knowledge and your experience with us. This has been fascinating.
Thanks for having me.
It's been a real pleasure. So I would like to say now on behalf of EcoFair Toronto that we want to thank all the event organizers, the presenters, the behind the scenes volunteers who've made today's event such a great success. And I'd like to thank all of you for participating. We'd also love to have your feedback, you out there in the audience, so please take a moment to share your thoughts. A link to our short and easy EcoFair survey is in the chat. We'd love to have everyone fill it out, audience, presenters, and volunteers. We want to hear from you. As most of you know, our month-long EcoFair is drawing near its end, but we're saving the best for last. Don't miss our grand finale tomorrow, Sunday, 2 to 4 p.m., starring former Ontario Environmental Commissioner Diane Sachs, plus our amazing EcoFair exhibitors, gathered into 3 big panels to answer all your questions. Goodbye, everyone, and thanks for joining us.